welcome to Forbes India Beyond the Boardroom, and I'm your host, Tushnoda Paul. Today's guest studied computer science from Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. After a brief stint at Motorola, he co-founded a healthcare revenue management firm in New York City that later sold to a large healthcare provider network in 2007. He launched his beer venture in 2015 and was included in Forbes Tycoons of Tomorrow 2018. We are talking about Ankur Jain, the founder and CEO of B9 Beverages, the maker of Bira 91 beers. Ankur, welcome to Forbes India Beyond the Boardroom.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, June.
Your dad is an architect plus an urban planner, while your mom's an author, interior designer. Quite a nice amalgamation in the household. Tell us a bit about your parents and your childhood. What did you kind of imbibe from them?
My house was full of books, and especially books on design. Informed a lot of my early days because I got really interested in art, architecture, painting, and so on. I think a lot of that has actually stayed with me, even though I'm not an active artist by any stretch of the imagination now.
Right.
I think it sort of built that design sensibility. So everything that I did from then on, from my early days in childhood, has been with a lens to design. In fact, even the college that I picked out was Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago, which was known for its architecture school and not its computer science program, just because I wanted secretly, like my dad, to become an architect.
Right. And I think you still have like a lot of interest in that field, like architecture and art, right? So do you still follow that in some way? Like, do you read up a lot on it?
So every time I travel, the two things that I always end up exploring because of my interest in architecture is essentially the cityscape, the landmarks, the architectural sort of a journey of that city. And the second big interest that I have is culinary in nature. So the first place that I end up going to is a grocery store in any city and figuring out what is the local produce like, what do people eat and drink and so on before I go anywhere else.
This is amazing. So you love cooking and you even take cooking classes wherever you go. That's something very interesting. So
that's been a big sort of part of my travels, especially in the last 5 to 7 years. My wife does not cook but enjoys eating. I love cooking and eating. And we decided that at least one day on every holiday that we take, I should be cooking for her. So that's the genesis of my cooking class obsession.
Delhi is known for its street food and like really yummy Punjabi food. So did that also influence while growing up? Like, did you have a fondness for all the Delhi food that you get?
Absolutely. I mean, I have my spots like any sort of good Delhiite. I have my spots. Initially, they were the places which my mum liked. So UPSC Chaatwala and Bengali Market and Bengal sweets in South Delhi and so on and so forth. And eventually, I think, of course, I started discovering things on my own. And I have those sort of spots that I go to very regularly, whether it's a coffee shop date with my daughter, which happens every morning at 8:30 a.m., who's just 15 months old, or whether it is a meal out with my friends and family.
That's so sweet. Your daughter is 15 months. What's her name, first of all?
Her name is Anya.
Anya. So how has fatherhood changed you? In what way would you say?
I think it's made me complete in a way. I think people say marriage completes you, but I think the birth of a daughter really does complete you in some way. And at least my team tells me that I've become a lot more empathetic and mellow, which is probably a good thing.
So tell us about the student life there in Chicago, and is that where you got introduced to beer?
At 18 years old, it was amazing to get my first introduction to America through Chicago. I sort of visited all of the landmarks. I became a campus representative for the Museum of Contemporary Art. But one very interesting class that I took was in history of technology. and the subject was Industrial Revolution. And I was barely 18, I think, it was first or second semester. And my professor, Professor Nisa, extremely passionate, smart guy, comes into the class, walks into the class, and brings in a couple of cases of porter beer. Anchor, I still remember the name of the beer, Anchor Steam Porter, one of the icons of American craft beer. And it was porters are beers that were made for they're dark beers, and they're called porters because they were beers that were consumed by porters in or port workers in English ports during the Industrial Revolution. They would work for the full day and they'd get a ration of porter beer. So he opens up a few bottles and he sort of passes around some portions of beer and says, "Guys, this is what the Industrial Revolution tasted like." And I think that was my first introduction to beer, and I think it stayed with me ever since.
Right. And you also had a startup stint in New York that I mentioned in the intro. So that was in Brooklyn. Apparently, there was this pub right around the corner that serves some amazing beer as well.
Exactly. So my office, I had a healthcare startup in New York.
Right.
And my office was in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood called Williamsburg, which was a hipster neighborhood. And Williamsburg's pretty much known for two things. One, it's a center of hipsterville across the world. And the second thing that it's known for is it's home to Brooklyn Brewery, which is one of the icons of American craft beer. And they have a small brewery and a tap room in that neighborhood. So every Friday, I would end up with my team to sample some of their brewers' new creations. And I think that's what converted me from being a cheap vodka drinker in college to becoming a craft beer snob. I think a lot of that experience is what has helped me create in Bira 91.
I guess this is going to be a difficult question, but what's your favorite beer flavor?
My favorite beer, hands down, is a beer called Orval. And it's a beer that's brewed by monks in Belgium. So there is 6 abbeys in Belgium that make beers, and they're brewed by monks or under the supervision of monks. One of them is Orval, and it's a great balance between something that you can drink every day and something that is full of flavor.
Right. Since you mentioned Belgium, I think you took this backpacking trip to Belgium. Talk about your adventures there. Was this right after college, right after the startup?
This was actually in 2008, and it was almost 6 or 8 weeks. And I started out in Belgium, but went to Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Vienna, and so on and so forth, Austria and so on and so forth. It was a really interesting road trip because the only thing that I was doing for 6 weeks was essentially going from one small town to the other. And in Europe, every small town has a local brewery or a brew pub. So I'd show up at a brewery at about 8:30 a.m. And they'd offer me a beer with some rye bread, right, fresh from the oven, maybe an omelet made out of eggs, which had just been laid, and so on. So it was just an insane experience. And that culture and love for things that are local, that are flavorful, is so alive in Europe and is so amazing. I probably drank about 100 beers on that trip.
From all this travel of yours, give us some funny, interesting travel anecdote. I'm sure there are many when you're backpacking.
This one was on a trip to Belgium, and there's a Trappist brewery by the name of Chimay. It was a beer that I was importing for a short period of time in India. And because of that, I sort of got an opportunity to visit the Abbey. And this is an abbey where it's not a church, right? There's no sort of regular sort of mass that's happening, etc. It's like an ashram where there's monks who are praying and meditating and so on. And there are students of religion who are staying there to study. And so I got to stay in a dormitory. The schedule had 4 different meals, and each of those meals ended with a beer, which was very interesting to see and experience. But also, around the time that we received our first term sheet from Sequoia, this was around the time that we had received a term sheet from Sequoia. And right in the middle of the Abbey, there's a huge garden. And in the middle, there is a Sequoia tree, which was gifted from somebody from California to the Abbey. So I just received my term sheet and I saw the Sequoia tree in the middle of Belgium, which is not known for Sequoia trees. I clicked a picture and sent it to the partner at Sequoia and said, this is a sign. And that's sort of
Wow.
an interesting anecdote. Yeah.
Are you binge watching any show right now?
I just finished watching Only Murders in the Building, which, if you've not seen, is probably the most fun show. I'm a big fan of Steve Martin and Martin Short. And they're just a fantastic show. Very, very different from anything else that I've seen. I've also just started watching Squid Game. So I'm on episode 3, which is completely different and a little bit disturbing, but it's fun.
And what about movies? Are you a Bollywood buff?
I'm actually starting to watch the classics because my wife is a Bollywood buff, and I've sort of missed out on a lot of the classics from 2000s and 2010. So I recently watched Dil Chahta Hai for the first time.
Oh!
I had not really seen that.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm catching up.
If you have to probably recommend 5 books that everyone should read, which ones would they be?
0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. It's a compilation of his lectures at Stanford. The second business book, or not quite business book, but something that I would really recommend is Che Guevara's Guerrilla Warfare. Again, it's a very thin book about his tactics and his motivation. If you're a fan of cooking, I'm a big fan of Ottolenghi and all of his books on cooking. So Plenty More, and the most recent one, which is called Flavors, which is those 3 are amazing. I'm not a big biography guy, but one of the books that I have really enjoyed reading, in fact, something that I was reading out loud on my honeymoon in Morocco to my wife, was Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, which is just probably the most honest account of what an entrepreneur goes through and how they survive, etc. And again, highly recommended.
Are you into podcasts as well?
A few. So I really enjoy Kara Swisher's Sway. And I also enjoy Freakonomics by Stephen Dubner.
Lastly, if you have to give probably some sort of an advice or some pep talk to all these young people out there who are aspiring to be maybe an entrepreneur someday, what would that be?
Number 1, no task is big enough. No challenge is big enough. Everything can be changed in the world. And if you're at it, if you're logical about it, it can happen. Number 2, in this journey of starting out, building a business, building a brand, building an organization, there will be tons of ups and downs, and therefore don't let failure get to you, because failure is temporary. And equally, which a lot of entrepreneurs unfortunately don't adhere to, is don't let success get to you either, because the moment you start feeling successful, you stop connecting. And number 3, stay true to your business, right? So I think I always say starting out and building a business is the greatest laundry that one can go through, right? It just cleanses you. If you're aware of what is happening, it keeps you super honest. And I think that's a very, very valuable thing overall. So I think if you're able to get that from your business and your endeavors, you'll always become better.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Ankur, so much for coming to Forbes India Beyond the Boardroom. It was so much fun chatting with you. Take care.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, June.